You wake up in the morning and reach for your phone before your mind has even fully arrived in the day. The screen lights up with headlines, alerts, opinions, and warnings. Something has happened somewhere in the world. A conflict escalates. Markets react. A crisis grows. 100 voices are already explaining why everything is unstable, uncertain, or on the verge of collapse. Within seconds, your mind is pulled into a storm you did not create and cannot control. You may not even notice the shift at first, but something subtle changes inside you. Your breath becomes slightly shallower. Your thoughts begin racing ahead of the present moment. The quiet morning you woke up into is replaced by a tension that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. This is the strange condition of modern life. The world can feel chaotic even when nothing immediate around you has changed. You may be sitting in your kitchen with a cup of coffee, yet your mind is traveling across continents, absorbing every conflict, every uncertainty, every prediction about the future, and slowly, without realizing it, your internal world begins to mirror the chaos outside. You start thinking about what might happen next. What if the situation escalates? What if the economy shifts? What if something changes that disrupts your plans, your work, your stability? The mind becomes restless, not because something is happening directly to you, but because uncertainty has entered your imagination. Most people live inside this quiet agitation without recognizing it. They call it stress, anxiety, or simply how the world is right now. But beneath these labels lies something more fundamental. The human mind struggles deeply with unpredictability. You want the world to feel stable, predictable, understandable. When events appear chaotic, your instinct is to search for certainty, to gather information, to analyze every possible outcome. It feels responsible, even intelligent, to stay informed. Yet something curious happens when this instinct grows unchecked. The more information you consume about chaos, the more chaotic your inner life becomes. You begin to feel as though calmness is irresponsible, as if remaining steady in an unstable world means you are ignoring reality. So you keep watching, keep reading, keep absorbing. News becomes a constant background noise in your thoughts. And even when you try to relax, the mind quietly returns to the same question: what happens next? This is where the modern struggle truly begins, because the chaos you are reacting to is often not happening in your immediate environment. It exists primarily inside your awareness. You are reacting to possibilities, interpretations, predictions, and narratives that travel instantly through technology. The mind absorbs them as if they are immediate threats, and slowly, your inner peace becomes dependent on events you have absolutely no influence over. Imagine a person walking through a quiet park. The air is cool. The trees move gently in the wind. Birds cross the sky without urgency. For a moment, everything is calm. Yet the person walking through this peaceful place feels restless. Their mind is replaying conversations, reading headlines from earlier, anticipating problems that might appear tomorrow. The environment is calm. The mind is not. This contrast reveals something important. Chaos does not only exist in the world, it can also exist inside perception. The Stoic philosophers understood this long before the modern world became as interconnected as it is today. They lived in times of war, political instability, disease, and uncertainty that would feel familiar to us now. Empires rose and collapsed. Leaders changed. Entire cities could be thrown into turmoil without warning. Yet, when you read the private writings of Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world, you do not find panic. You find reminders. He wrote to himself not about controlling the world, but about controlling his response to it. Again and again, he returned to the same idea. Events themselves are rarely what disturb us. It is our judgment about them that creates turmoil. This insight can feel uncomfortable at first, because it suggests that the chaos we feel may not come entirely from the outside. You may say, but the world really is unstable. And in many ways, that is true. History has never been perfectly calm. Wars, uncertainty, and conflict have existed in every era of human civilization. The Stoics were not naive about this. They did not pretend that external events were harmless or unimportant, but they recognized something most people overlook. You cannot build inner stability by trying to stabilize the entire world. If your calm depends on global events becoming predictable, you will spend your life waiting. Consider how often people say, things will settle down soon. They believe that once a certain situation resolves, once a particular crisis passes, life will return to normal. But history shows that the world rarely pauses long enough for this promise to be fulfilled. One uncertainty gives way to another. There is always something new that could disturb you. The Stoic response to this reality was neither denial nor indifference. It was clarity. They separated what belongs to you from what does not. You cannot control the movement of nations. You cannot control the decisions of leaders, the direction of economies, or the unpredictable events that shape history. Yet the mind constantly tries to extend its influence into these areas, hoping that worry might somehow create control. Worry feels like preparation, but often it is simply a habit of mental resistance. Imagine holding a glass of water in your hand. At first, the weight feels insignificant, but if you hold it for hours, the strain becomes painful. The glass has not changed. The act of holding it without release is what creates suffering. Many people carry the weight of global uncertainty in the same way. They hold on to it mentally, analyzing, predicting, replaying, discussing. The mind believes it is staying vigilant, but in reality, it is exhausting itself. The Stoics saw this pattern clearly. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most influential Stoic teachers, observed that people are disturbed not by things themselves, but by the opinions they form about those things. This does not mean events are meaningless. It means your relationship with them determines your inner experience. 2. People can read the same headline and react entirely differently. One becomes consumed with fear and speculation. The other acknowledges the information, reflects briefly, and then returns attention to what is actually within their reach. The external world remains identical. The internal world diverges completely. This is the uncomfortable truth many people avoid. Chaos becomes overwhelming when you attempt to mentally control what was never yours to control. When the mind refuses to accept uncertainty, it creates tension. It demands clarity from a world that cannot promise it. And the more the world resists that demand, the more agitation grows inside you. This tension can quietly shape your entire day. You may still go to work, speak with friends, and complete your responsibilities. But underneath these actions runs a subtle unease, a feeling that something unstable is always approaching. Over time, this mental posture becomes normal. People begin to believe that constant vigilance is the price of awareness. They assume that calmness must come from ignorance. The Stoics believed the opposite. They believed calmness comes from understanding the limits of your control. When you accept that the world will always contain uncertainty, something inside you begins to loosen. The mind stops trying to dominate events it cannot influence. Attention returns to what is immediately real: your thoughts, your actions, your character in this moment. This shift does not eliminate chaos from the world, but it changes the place where chaos lives. Instead of existing inside your mind, it remains where it belongs, outside your control. And in that separation, you wake up in the morning and reach for your phone before your mind has even fully arrived in the day. The screen lights up with headlines, alerts, opinions, and warnings. Something has happened somewhere in the world. A conflict escalates. Markets react. A crisis grows. 100 voices are already explaining why everything is unstable, uncertain, or on the verge of collapse. When people hear the Stoic idea that you should focus only on what is within your control, they often nod in agreement. It sounds reasonable, even obvious. Of course, you cannot control the entire world. Of course, worrying about distant events will not change them. Yet despite understanding this, most people continue to feel pulled into the same cycle of tension and mental noise. The difficulty is not intellectual. It is emotional. The human mind does not merely want to understand the world. It wants to feel safe within it. And safety, in the imagination, often takes the shape of control. If you know what is happening everywhere, if you analyze every possible outcome, if you stay ahead of the next crisis, perhaps you can avoid being caught off guard. This belief is rarely spoken aloud, but it quietly guides behavior. People scroll endlessly through news feeds late at night, convincing themselves they are staying informed. They replay conversations and scenarios in their minds, believing they are preparing for what might happen. They absorb commentary, opinions, and predictions from strangers across the world, hoping that somewhere in this flood of information lies a sense of certainty. But certainty rarely appears. Instead, something else emerges. The mind becomes crowded. Imagine a man sitting at his desk after a long day of work. His laptop is open. Several tabs are still glowing on the screen, each one filled with updates about global events. One article warns of escalation in a conflict. Another speculates about economic instability. A third predicts social changes that might unfold in the coming years. None of these things are happening inside the room where he sits. Yet the tension in his body feels real. His shoulders are tight. His attention jumps restlessly from one piece of information to the next. Even after closing the computer, the thoughts continue running. Later that night, as he lies in bed, the mind returns to the same questions. What if things get worse? What if the situation spreads? What if my life changes in ways I cannot predict? Hours pass. Sleep arrives slowly. This scene plays out quietly in millions of lives. It does not require dramatic circumstances. All it takes is a mind that believes awareness must include emotional involvement with everything it sees. The Stoics observed something different about human suffering. They noticed that much of it begins not with events themselves, but with the desire for events to unfold according to our preferences. You want stability. You want the future to behave logically. You want people to act rationally and systems to remain predictable. These desires are understandable, but the world rarely organizes itself around human expectations. When reality moves in a direction you did not choose, the mind resists. It tries to pull reality back into alignment with its preferences. And when that fails, frustration grows. This resistance can take many forms. Sometimes it appears as anger at leaders, institutions, or systems that seem incapable of maintaining order. Sometimes it appears as anxiety about future consequences. Sometimes it appears as endless analysis, where the mind keeps searching for explanations that might restore a sense of clarity. Yet, underneath all of these reactions lies the same impulse: the desire to control what cannot be controlled. Marcus Aurelius confronted this reality every day of his life. As the emperor of Rome, he carried responsibilities that would overwhelm most people. Wars threatened the borders of the empire. Political tensions surrounded him constantly. Disease spread unpredictably through cities and armies. If anyone had reason to feel consumed by chaos, it was him. Yet, in his private writings, he repeatedly reminded himself of something simple. External events belong to the world. Your response belongs to you. This distinction sounds small, but its implications are enormous. Consider what happens when the mind refuses to accept this boundary. Every global conflict becomes personal anxiety. Every economic shift becomes personal insecurity. Every political decision becomes personal outrage. The mind extends itself into every corner of the world, trying to manage forces that were never meant to fit inside a single consciousness. It is like trying to hold an ocean inside your hands. No matter how tightly you grasp, the water escapes. The Stoics did not advise people to withdraw from reality or ignore the world's problems. They understood that humans are social beings who live within communities and systems. But they also recognize that emotional stability requires a certain discipline of attention. You must decide what deserves your inner energy. Without this discipline, the mind becomes a servant to every disturbance that appears on the horizon. Think about how quickly your attention moves when something alarming appears in the news. Within seconds, your mind begins constructing stories about what it means. You imagine consequences, reactions, ripple effects. You may even start discussing these possibilities with others, reinforcing the sense that something urgent demands your emotional involvement. But pause for a moment and examine the situation more closely. Has anything in your immediate environment changed? Are you suddenly required to act? Is there a decision you must make right now? Most of the time, the honest answer is no, yet the mind behaves as though an immediate response is necessary. This is where suffering quietly enters the picture. Because when the mind treats distant events as personal emergencies, it cannot rest. Epictetus taught his students to begin every difficult situation with a question: what part of this truly belongs to me? If the answer was nothing, then the wise response was not indifference, but acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means recognizing the boundary between your sphere of influence and the vast landscape of events beyond it. This boundary protects your inner life. Without it, every external disturbance gains permission to occupy your thoughts. Consider a simple example. A woman is commuting home from work on a crowded train. Around her, people are absorbed in their phones. One passenger reads an article about an international conflict. Another scrolls through commentary on social media. A third is watching a video analysis predicting the next escalation. Within minutes, the emotional atmosphere of the train shifts. Quiet tension spreads as people absorb information designed to provoke reaction. Yet outside the windows, the city moves calmly. Cars follow their lanes. Pedestrians cross the streets. life continues with its ordinary rhythm. Two realities exist simultaneously. One is external, composed of the physical environment and the actions required in the present moment. The other is internal, created by the interpretations and fears circulating through the mind. Most people live inside the second reality without realizing it. The Stoic approach invites you to step back and observe this pattern. Instead of automatically reacting to every disturbance, you begin asking a different question. Does this event require my action or merely my awareness? If action is required, then calm clarity becomes your greatest strength. If action is not required, then agitation becomes unnecessary suffering. This shift does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You no longer scatter your attention across every possible crisis. Instead, you preserve your energy for the places where your influence actually matters: your character, your decisions, your relationships, and the immediate responsibilities of your life. Yet even when people recognize this wisdom, another obstacle often appears: ego. The ego does not. When people hear the Stoic idea that you should focus only on what is within your control, they often nod in agreement. It sounds reasonable, even obvious. Of course, you cannot control the entire world. Of course, worrying about distant events will not change them. Yet despite understanding this, most people continue to feel pulled into the same cycle of tension and mental noise. When people hear the Stoic idea that you should focus only on what is within your control, they often nod in agreement. It sounds reasonable, even obvious. Of course, you cannot control the entire world. Of course, worrying about distant events will not change them. Yet despite understanding this, most people continue to feel pulled into the same cycle of tension and mental noise. There is a quiet turning point that happens when you begin to truly understand the Stoic perspective. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a sudden rush of relief. Instead, it feels like a subtle shift in posture, as if something inside you has stopped leaning forward in constant anticipation. There is a quiet turning point that happens when you begin to truly understand the Stoic perspective. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a sudden rush of relief. Instead, it feels like a subtle shift in posture, as if something inside you has stopped leaning forward in constant anticipation. Until this point, chaos may have felt like a force pressing against you from all directions. Every new development in the world seemed to demand emotional engagement. You might have believed that staying tense was a form of preparedness. That worrying meant you were taking life seriously. But slowly, you begin to see something different. You begin to notice that most of your distress does not come from direct harm. It comes from interpretation. It comes from imagining outcomes that have not happened. It comes from rehearsing conversations and consequences that may never unfold. The Stoics called this misuse of imagination one of the greatest sources of human suffering. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the present moment is rarely unbearable. It is the mind's projection into the future that creates the feeling of overwhelm. He understood that the human imagination, when left undisciplined, turns uncertainty into catastrophe. Consider how this works in ordinary life. You read about instability in the economy. Within seconds, the mind jumps forward. What if I lose my job? What if opportunities disappear? What if my plans fall apart? None of these events are happening right now, yet the body reacts as though they are. Your heart rate shifts. Your muscles tighten slightly. A quiet heaviness settles in your chest. Now imagine a different approach. You read the same information, but instead of allowing the mind to race ahead, you pause. You ask a simple question: what is required of me in this moment? Perhaps the answer is nothing beyond continuing your responsibilities with steadiness. Perhaps the only action available to you is to manage your finances wisely, do your work with integrity, and avoid unnecessary panic. The external situation remains uncertain, but internally, something changes. Instead of projecting yourself into a hypothetical future, you remain anchored in what is actually within reach. This is where the Stoic mindset diverges sharply from modern behavior, but modern culture trains the mind to react instantly. News cycles reward urgency. Social media amplifies emotional responses. Opinions are formed within minutes. Outrage spreads faster than reflection. You are encouraged to feel something immediately, to comment, to share, to respond. In this environment, calmness can feel unnatural. It may even feel detached. But Stoicism does not teach detachment from reality. It teaches detachment from unnecessary, deep emotional turbulence. There is a difference. Detachment from reality would mean ignoring events altogether. Stoic detachment means observing events without surrendering your inner stability to them. It is the ability to acknowledge chaos without absorbing it. Imagine standing near the edge of a storm. The wind is strong. The sky is dark. You can see the turbulence clearly, but you are not inside it. You are standing on solid ground, aware yet not engulfed. Most people, however, step directly into the storm mentally. They let every gust of information push them in a new direction. Their emotional state changes with every update. Calm in the morning, agitated by noon, resigned by evening, hopeful the next day, then anxious again. This constant fluctuation drains energy. The Stoic mindset seeks something more stable. It begins with recognizing that events themselves are neutral until the mind labels them. This can feel counterintuitive. War, crisis, and instability seem inherently negative, and in many practical senses they are. But the suffering you experience internally is not a direct transmission of those events. It is mediated by your thoughts. Epictetus explained that when something happens, you have two options. You can react automatically, letting your first impulse dictate your emotional state. Or you can pause and examine your impression. He encouraged his students to say to themselves, "You are just an impression, not the thing itself." This small mental pause creates space. In that space, you regain choice. Consider a realistic scenario. A woman checks her phone during lunch and sees an article predicting worsening global tensions. Her first impulse is fear. The mind immediately imagines instability spreading. She feels a surge of anxiety and begins messaging friends to discuss it. Now, imagine she pauses instead. She notices the initial reaction but does not immediately follow it. She takes a breath. She asks herself, what part of this is within my control right now? The answer might be simple. Continue working. Be present with the people around her. Avoid feeding speculation with further speculation. Nothing about the external world changes in that moment, but her internal experience shifts from helpless agitation to quiet steadiness. This is not denial. It is discipline. The emotional shift that occurs here is subtle but powerful. Instead of feeling carried by events, you begin to feel grounded in yourself. The world may still be unpredictable, but your inner state is no longer dictated by it. At first, this shift can feel almost unsettling. You may notice a strange silence where anxiety used to be. The mind, accustomed to constant engagement, may attempt to return to familiar patterns of worry. It may whisper that you are not paying enough attention. But as you practice this pause repeatedly, a deeper realization emerges. You begin to understand that most of what you feared was never present in your immediate reality. It existed primarily in imagination. And imagination, when unrestrained, is capable of generating endless distress. There is a deeply reflective moment that often accompanies this realization. It may come while walking alone, or sitting quietly after a long day. You suddenly see how much of your life has been spent anticipating problems rather than living moments. See how often you have sacrificed present peace for hypothetical futures. And in that recognition, something softens. The Stoic Way is not about hardening yourself emotionally. It is about clarifying where your energy truly belongs. Chaos in the world is real, but chaos in the mind is optional. This does not mean you will never feel concern. It does not mean you will never experience fear. It means those emotions no longer own you. They arise, and you examine them. They suggest futures, and you return to the present. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of seeing it as a threat that must be eliminated, you begin to see it as a constant condition of life. The future has always been uncertain. Every generation has faced unknowns. The desire for complete predictability is a quiet illusion. When you release that illusion, you stop. There is a quiet turning point that happens when you begin to truly understand the Stoic perspective. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a sudden rush of relief. Instead, it feels like a subtle shift in posture, as if something inside you has stopped, leaning forward in constant anticipation. Understanding something intellectually is one thing. Living it, especially in a world that constantly pulls at your attention, is another. The Stoic way of remaining calm in chaos does not happen automatically once you agree with it. It becomes real only when you practice it in ordinary, unremarkable moments. Understanding something intellectually is one thing. Living it, especially in a world that constantly pulls at your attention, is another. The Stoic way of remaining calm in chaos does not happen automatically once you agree with it. It becomes real only when you practice it in ordinary, unremarkable moments. Calmness is not built during the peak of crisis. It is built in the quiet repetitions of daily life. You may imagine that staying steady requires grand acts of discipline, but often it begins with something far simpler, noticing when your mind starts to drift beyond what belongs to you. Consider a typical evening. You return home after work. You are tired but not overwhelmed. You sit down to relax and open your phone. Within minutes, you are drawn into commentary about global instability, predictions about the future, heated arguments between strangers who seem certain that everything is deteriorating. You feel a slight tightening in your chest. It is subtle, almost invisible, but it is there. At this moment, you are standing at a quiet crossroads. One path leads deeper into absorption. You continue scrolling. You read more. You engage emotionally. You begin imagining how events might affect your life. Your body remains still on the couch, but internally you are running. The other path is quieter. You notice the tension. You recognize the familiar pull, and instead of following it automatically, you pause. The pause is small, but it changes everything. You ask yourself, is this information helping me act wisely right now? Or is it feeding an anxiety that has nowhere to go? This question is not about ignorance. It is about discernment. The Stoics trained themselves to separate what requires action from what merely stimulates reaction. Most of what passes through your awareness each day does not require immediate action. It invites emotional involvement, not practical responsibility. When you begin to see this clearly, your behavior shifts naturally. You become more selective about what you consume, not because you are hiding from reality, but because you understand the cost of constant emotional agitation. Imagine a man who has decided to limit his exposure to news to a brief, intentional period each day. He stays informed, but he does not allow updates to interrupt every moment. At first, this feels uncomfortable. He worries he might miss something important, but gradually he notices something else. His thoughts are less fragmented. His mood is more stable. He is more present in conversations. The world outside remains uncertain, yet his inner life feels less crowded. This is not passivity. It is stewardship of attention. Another application appears in conversation. When colleagues begin speculating anxiously about global events, you may feel the urge to match their intensity, to contribute your own fears or predictions, to align yourself emotionally with the group. But what if instead you remain composed, not dismissive, not superior, simply steady? You acknowledge the situation without escalating it. You avoid dramatic conclusions. You speak carefully without adding unnecessary alarm. Your calm presence subtly influences the emotional tone of the interaction. This is how Stoic strength expresses itself in the modern world. It is not loud. It does not argue aggressively. It does not claim moral high ground. It simply refuses to amplify chaos. One of the most powerful internal shifts you can make is redefining what responsibility truly means. Many people equate responsibility with constant emotional involvement. They believe that if something matters, they must feel strongly about it at all times. But Stoicism suggests a different view. Responsibility means acting wisely where you can act, and accepting peacefully where you cannot. There is dignity in this restraint. Consider how often you rehearse worst-case scenarios in your mind. You tell yourself that you are preparing, but preparation without actionable steps quickly becomes rumination. True preparation is practical. If there are steps you can take to strengthen your position, you take them calmly. You manage your finances responsibly. You maintain strong relationships. You cultivate skills. You care for your health. These actions are within your control. But once you have taken reasonable measures, continuing to replay potential disasters does not add protection. It adds strain. There is a deeply human moment that often arrives when you begin practicing this discipline. You realize how much of your mental energy has been spent trying to outthink the future. You see how often you have sacrificed present peace in exchange for imagined control. And slowly, you begin to trust something quieter. You begin to trust your capacity to respond when the time comes. Rather than trying to pre-experience every possible difficulty, Seneca once wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. This observation feels almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. Think about how many situations you have feared intensely, only to find that when they actually arrived, you handled them more competently than expected. The mind often underestimates its resilience while overestimating future threats. When you recognize this pattern, you start to relax into a different posture toward uncertainty. Instead of gripping the future tightly, you stand ready but unstrained. There is also an emotional maturity required here. It involves accepting that you cannot shield yourself from every possible hardship. No philosophy can guarantee that life will unfold gently. The Stoics were clear about this. Difficulty is part of existence, but inner collapse is not inevitable. The more you practice distinguishing between what belongs to you and what does not, the more stable your internal foundation becomes. Chaos may still appear on screens, in conversations, and in headlines, but it does not automatically gain entry into your core. Imagine again that person walking through the park. This time, they leave their phone in their pocket. They notice the sound of wind in the trees. They feel the rhythm of their steps. The world beyond the park still contains conflict and uncertainty. But in this moment, they are not required to solve it. They are required only to walk. This simplicity is not trivial. It is grounding. The Stoic path in a chaotic world does not remove uncertainty. It clarifies your place within it. You are not the manager of global events. You are the steward of your own character. And when you take that role, seriously understanding something intellectually is one thing. Living it, especially in a world that constantly pulls at your attention, is another. The Stoic way of remaining calm in chaos does not happen automatically once you agree with it. It becomes real only when you practice it in ordinary, unremarkable moments. To remain sovereign within yourself does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means standing within it without surrendering your inner authority. To remain sovereign within yourself does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means standing within it without surrendering your inner authority. There is a subtle but powerful distinction. Here, most people move through life as if their emotional state were a referendum held by external events. Markets rise, they feel secure. Headlines darken, they feel uneasy. Approval arrives, they expand. Criticism appears, they contract. Their center of gravity lives outside them. Stoic sovereignty begins when that center shifts inward. You stop asking, what is happening out there, as the primary determinant of your state. Instead, you begin asking, how will I meet what is happening? This shift transforms uncertainty from a threat into a training ground. When the future appears unstable, the untrained mind scrambles for guarantees. It searches for predictions, reassurance, definitive answers. It wants certainty before it can relax. But certainty is rarely offered, so the Stoic makes a different choice. Instead of demanding certainty from the world, he cultivates stability within himself. This stability is not rigid. It is not denial. It is flexible strength. Consider how a tree survives a storm. It does not resist the wind with brittle defiance. It bends, its roots hold firm, but its branches yield. The storm passes. The tree remains. Your character is the root system. External events are the weather. When you understand this deeply, you stop confusing turbulence with personal failure. A chaotic world does not mean you are doing something wrong. It means you are living in reality. Sovereignty also requires restraint in interpretation. Events are rarely as absolute as they first appear. The mind rushes to label them disaster, catastrophe, irreversible decline. Yet history is filled with moments that seemed final and were not. The sovereign mind pauses before declaring conclusions. It acknowledges difficulty without surrendering to dramatic narratives. It accepts that outcomes unfold over time. It focuses not on forecasting every possibility, but on preparing to respond with integrity. Integrity becomes your compass. When you decide that your primary responsibility is to act with clarity, fairness, courage, and moderation regardless of circumstances, you gain a strange kind of freedom. You cannot control the volatility of markets. You cannot dictate geopolitical shifts. You cannot eliminate uncertainty, but you can control whether you act impulsively or thoughtfully. You can control whether you spread panic or steadiness. You can control whether you abandon your principles under pressure. This is sovereignty. There is also a quiet humility in this stance. You recognize that you are a participant in a vast and complex world, not its architect. You influence what you touch, directly your work, your family, your habits, your responses. Beyond that, you release the illusion of omnipotence, and something surprising happens when you release it. You feel lighter. The mental strain of trying to supervise the entire future dissolves. Your energy returns to the present moment, where it can actually be used. You begin to measure your days, not by how well the world behaved, but by how well you did. Did you remain patient when irritation tempted you? Did you speak carefully when conversation turned heated? Did you act responsibly with what was in your care? These become the meaningful metrics. Over time, this orientation builds quiet confidence. Not the loud confidence of prediction, but the steady confidence of preparedness. You trust that whatever unfolds, you will meet it as you have trained yourself to meet small disturbances each day with composure. This trust is earned gradually. It grows each time you pause instead of react, each time you limit unnecessary exposure to agitation, each time you accept what is beyond you and act on what is within you, and eventually, calmness stops feeling like an effort. It becomes your default posture. The world may remain unpredictable. Headlines may continue to fluctuate between optimism and alarm. Conversations may rise and fall with collective emotion, but within you, there is a steady space, a space that does not depend on constant reassurance, space that does not collapse under speculation, a space that understands its role. You are not here to control the storm. You are here to see you to remain sovereign within yourself. Does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means standing within it without surrendering your inner authority.